Caleb's Story, Chapter 4. The morning was bright and clear when I woke. No snow or wind. I could smell coffee. John's room was empty. The bed was made, his small carrying pack by the window. I looked into Cassie's room and she was still asleep, one arm thrown back, her hair in a tangle. Downstairs the coffee pot was hot to the touch. Through the window I could see John gathering wood from the shed. Nick watched, and Lottie leapt through the drifts and barked. John tossed a small piece of wood, and Nick picked it up. They began walking back to the house. "Caleb, did you make this coffee?" Sarah was in her robe, a cup in her hand. I shook my head. "It must have been John," I said. The door opened and John came in with the dogs. "This is wonderful coffee," said Sarah. John nodded. "I've had years of coffee making," he said, dumping wood into the bin. "That's Caleb's job, bringing in wood," said Sarah. "Caleb took care of my horse yesterday," said John. He sat down suddenly, his face pale. Sarah looked alarmed. "Are you sure you're well enough for this?" she asked. I wondered if John would tell Sarah about the pills he had hidden in his pocket, but he didn't. John got up and poured coffee for himself. "I'm well enough," he said quickly. "The animals, Caleb, they need to be fed," said Sarah. John held up his hand. "No, Caleb, I've already done that." "Thank you, John," said Sarah. "I like this work," said John. "I used to farm a long time ago." "Did you?" asked Sarah. "You know, I never asked you where you live, where your home is." John took a long drink of coffee. He didn't answer. He looked over Sarah's head at Cassie on the stairs. "Ah, the Queen," he said. Cassie came over and sat on Sarah's lap. "The Queen of what?" asked Cassie. "Questions," said John. "The Queen of Questions." Cassie smiled. She liked that. The dog sat up suddenly, listening. Lottie ran to the door, and Nick followed her, barking. "Hush," said Sarah, putting Cassie down. She went to the window. "There's Jacob," she said, her face bright. "He's early." Sarah opened the front door, and cold air rushed into the warm kitchen. Papa came in and put his arms around Sarah. "I'm glad you're home," said Sarah, her face in Papa's neck. "I'm glad too," said Jacob. Very slowly John stood. "Papa!" cried Cassie. "There's my girl," said Papa. He picked her up and came into the kitchen. "Hello, Caleb." "Is there school, Papa? Was anyone there when you went by?" I asked. "No horses. I don't think there's school today," said Papa. "The snow has drifted pretty deep in places." "Jacob, you have a visitor," said Sarah. "He came to see you yesterday." "Oh?" Papa looked at John. "Do I know you?" "You and I knew each other a long time ago, Jacob," said John. Papa bent his head to one side thoughtfully. Then, as if he couldn't find any other words, John repeated softly, "A long time ago." Suddenly, Papa stepped backward as if he had been hit. He put Cassie down. "Jacob," asked Sarah, "what's wrong?" Papa stared at John. Everyone was quiet, even Cassie. When Papa did speak, his voice was so soft I could hardly hear him. "You? How can it be?" Papa's voice broke. "Jacob? Jacob, who is this?" asked Sarah, stepping closer to Jacob as if to protect him from something. "What?" Cassie moved closer to me and I took her hand. Then Papa saw us. "Caleb, take Cassie upstairs," he said sharply. "Do you mean now?" I asked. I was not used to his sharp tone. "Yes, Caleb, please get Cassie dressed," said Sarah more softly. "Come, Cassie," I said. "But Caleb," Cassie began. "Hush," I said. Cassie and I went to the stairway where we were out of sight, but Papa's voice stopped us and we sat on the steps, listening. "You were dead." "Dead?" Papa's voice sounded ragged, as if it hurt to talk. Startled, Seal ran past us up the stairs. Is that what she told you? John asked softly. Jacob, who is this? Asked Sarah. There was a moment of silence. This is my father. This is John Whiting, said Papa, his voice growing louder. But you told me he was dead, said Sarah. I could hear the confusion in her voice. That's what I thought. Cassie tugged at my sleeve. Who is he, Caleb? She whispered. He is Papa's father. Our grandfather, I whispered back to her. Grandfather? Whispered Cassie slowly, as if trying out a word she'd never used. My heart began to beat so fast in my chest that I could hardly breathe. Grandfather. Then I heard the front door slam, Papa leaving. It opened and closed again, Sarah going after him. Then silence. I heard John walk across the kitchen and pull out a chair and sit down. Very faintly I heard the rattle of the pill bottle. My grandfather was taking a pill. My grandfather.